The blood-soaked stranger collapsed at Rosemary Foster's doorstep, just as the first light of dawn painted the Montana sky in hues of amber and gold. She'd heard the horse's labored breathing first, then the thud of a body hitting her porch. When she opened the door, rifle in hand, she found him a man with a gunshot wound to his shoulder, his face pale beneath the grime of travel, his breathing shallow but persistent. "Help me," he managed before consciousness slipped away from him like water through cupped hands. Rosemary stared down at the wounded man, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 years alone in this cabin had made her cautious of strangers, especially men who appeared out of nowhere bleeding and half dead. But something in his face, the lines of suffering etched around his mouth, perhaps, or the vulnerability of his unconscious state, stirred something in her that had been dormant since Daniel's death. "Fool woman," she muttered to herself as she set down her rifle and bent to drag him inside. The year was 1878, and Rosemary Foster had been alone on her homestead outside Billings, Montana Territory for 2 long winters since influenza had taken her husband and infant son. At 32, she had resigned herself to solitude, finding bitter comfort in the routines that kept her alive through the changing seasons. She grew her own food, hunted when necessary, and traded with passing travelers for what she couldn't produce herself. She needed no one, or so she had convinced herself. The stranger was heavy, but Rosemary was strong from years of farm work. She managed to drag him inside and onto the bearskin rug before the hearth. In the better light, she could see he was a tall man, lean but muscular, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn denims, a dusty shirt, scuffed boots with spurs that jangled as she moved him. A holster hung at his hip, the gun still in place. Rosemary removed the weapon first, placing it well out of reach. Then she cut away his bloodied shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, which was fortunate. Still, the wound was angry and hot to the touch, and she knew infection was a real danger. "Who shot you, I wonder?" she asked the unconscious man as she began cleaning the wound with whiskey. He groaned, but didn't wake. "And why did you end up at my door?" Working methodically, she cleaned, stitched, and bandaged the wound, then covered him with a quilt. She built up the fire and put on a pot of coffee, keeping one eye on her unexpected patient as she moved about the cabin. It had been a long time since she'd shared her space with another living soul, and the presence of the stranger, even unconscious, felt like an intrusion. Outside, the stranger's horse was standing patiently beside her porch, a handsome bay gelding with a white blaze. Rosemary led it to her small stable, where it could rest alongside her own mare. The saddlebags yielded few clues about the man's identity: some clothes, ammunition, a few dollars, and a small leather-bound journal that she set aside without opening. There was no wanted poster with his face on it, which was something of a relief. By midday, the man had developed a fever. Rosemary bathed his forehead with cool water and forced sips of willow bark tea between his cracked lips when he stirred. As she worked, she found herself studying his face: the strong jaw darkened with stubble, the straight nose, the furrow between his brows that remained even in unconsciousness. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with the weathered look of someone who lived his life outdoors. "Don't you die on me, stranger," she told him firmly. "I've buried enough people to last a lifetime." Night fell, and still he burned with fever. Rosemary dozed in her rocking chair beside him, waking at each of his restless movements. He mumbled in his delirium fragments of speech that made little sense to her. Names, places, pleas for mercy or forgiveness. Once, he cried out so sharply that she startled awake to find him thrashing beneath the quilt. "Easy," she soothed, pressing him back down. "You're safe here." His eyes opened then, startlingly blue against his flushed face. For a moment, they focused on her with surprising clarity. "Angel," he whispered. Despite herself, Rosemary laughed softly. "No, not hardly. Just the woman whose floor you're bleeding on." His eyes drifted closed again, but his hand caught hers with surprising strength. "Thank you," he murmured before slipping back into troubled sleep. Rosemary found herself sitting there longer than necessary, her hand still in his. It had been so long since she'd touched another person. Daniel's face rose in her memory, his gentle smile, the feel of his hand against her cheek, and guilt washed over her. She pulled her hand away and returned to her chair, wrapping her arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. By morning, the fever had broken. Rosemary found the stranger watching her as she stoked the fire, his eyes clear but guarded. "Where am I?" His voice was deep, roughened by thirst. "My cabin," she replied, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "About 15 miles outside Billings. You collapsed on my doorstep yesterday morning with a bullet in your shoulder." He accepted the water gratefully, trying to rise on one elbow before wincing in pain. "Thank you for your help, madam. I'm in your debt." "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her distance now that he was awake. "And who shot you?" He hesitated, eyes flicking to where his gun rested on her table, well out of reach. "My name is Wade Blackburn," he said after a moment. "I was riding with a cattle drive headed to Wyoming when we ran into some trouble. Rustlers hit us 2 nights back. I took a bullet chasing after them." Rosemary studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "You're a long way off course for a cattle drive to Wyoming." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam. Got separated from the others in the fight. Been riding hard since then, trying to circle back and find them. Must have gotten turned around in the dark. And the rustlers?" The smile disappeared. "Lost them. Or they lost me. Either way, I ended up here." There was more to the story. Rosemary could sense it, but she didn't press. Whatever trouble this man was in, it wasn't her concern. All that mattered was getting him well enough to move on. "You need rest," she said briskly. "That wound was bad, and you've lost a lot of blood. You can stay until you're fit to travel, but then you'll need to be on your way." Wade nodded, settling back down. "I understand. I won't impose on your hospitality longer than necessary, Mississippi." "Foster," she supplied after a moment. "Rosemary Foster." "Thank you, Miss Foster. I'm obliged to you." "Mrs.," she corrected, her hand instinctively going to the simple gold band she still wore. "It's Mrs. Foster." Understanding flickered in his eyes, followed by a question he was too polite to ask. "My husband's been gone 2 years," she said, answering the unspoken inquiry. "I manage on my own now." Wade Blackburn looked around the neat cabin, taking in the evidence of her solitary life. "You've done well, by the looks of it. Not many women could handle such isolation." "Not many women have a choice," she returned, moving to the stove. "I'll fix you something to eat. You'll heal faster with food in your belly." Over the next few days, Wade grew stronger. The wound showed no signs of infection, and color returned to his face. Rosemary kept him at arm's length, providing care with brisk efficiency, but retreating whenever conversation threatened to become personal. She found his presence increasingly disruptive to her carefully ordered existence. Not because he was demanding, he was, in fact, remarkably considerate, but because he reminded her of what she had lost. For his part, Wade seemed to understand her need for distance. He spent much of his time sleeping or staring into the fire, lost in thoughts he didn't share. When he was awake, he observed her with quiet attention, offering to help with small tasks that wouldn't strain his injured shoulder. For days after his arrival, Rosemary returned from gathering eggs to find Wade outside, chopping wood one-handed with dogged determination. His face was pale with the effort, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool spring air. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, setting down her basket of eggs. "You'll tear those stitches and be back where you started." Wade paused, leaning on the axe. "I don't like being a burden," he said simply. "You've done enough for me already. So you thought you'd repay me by bleeding to death on my woodpile?" She marched over and took the axe from his hand. "Get back inside before you fall over." To her surprise, he laughed, a warm sound that caught her off guard. "Yes, madam," he said, raising his good hand in surrender. "I know better than to argue with a woman holding an axe." Despite herself, Rosemary felt her lips twitch toward a smile. She quickly suppressed it. "You're a fool, Wade Blackburn." "Been told that more than once," he admitted as he followed her back to the cabin. "Usually by women a good deal smarter than me." Inside, she made him sit while she examined his shoulder. The stitches had held, thankfully, but the area was red from exertion. "You're lucky," she muttered. "Another day or two, and you can try being useful." Slowly, Wade watched her as she applied a fresh poultice to the wound. "You've done this before," he observed. "Patching up injured men, I mean." Rosemary's hands stilled for a moment. "My husband was a trapper before we settled here. He'd come home torn up from time to time. And during the war, she trailed off, memories of blood-soaked field hospitals rising unbidden in her mind. You were a nurse? For a time. She resumed bandaging with quick, efficient movements. With the Union forces in Tennessee. That's where I met Daniel, my husband. He was wounded at Chickamauga. Wade's expression softened. The war taught us all hard lessons. Something in his tone made her look up. You fought. He nodded. Confederate cavalry. Under Forrest. Rosemary's hands fell away from his shoulder. We were enemies, then. Were, he emphasized quietly. That war's been over 13 years. We're just people now, trying to live with what we did and what we saw. She stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable with their proximity. Yes, well, the bandage should hold. Don't do anything foolish for the rest of the day. That evening, as they ate a simple supper of rabbit stew, Wade broke the companionable silence that had fallen between them. May I ask about your husband? How you came to be out here? Rosemary stiffened. She had shared so little of herself with anyone since Daniel's death that the question felt invasive. Yet there was nothing but genuine interest in Wade's expression. After the war, we came west, she said finally. Daniel had family in Missouri, but too many bad memories lingered back east. We worked our way out here, taking odd jobs. Saved enough to stake a claim on this land 4 years ago. She stirred her stew absently. He was a good man. Worked hard. Had dreams of raising cattle someday. Building something to pass on to our children. You have children? Wade asked gently. Rosemary's hand went to the small silver locket at her throat. Had. A son. Samuel. He was just learning to walk when the influenza came through. She swallowed hard. It took them both within a week of each other. 2 years ago this spring. Wade's face showed nothing but compassion. I'm sorry, Rosemary. That's a hard burden to bear alone. Life is full of hard burdens, she said, pushing back from the table. We bear them because we must. Later, as Wade slept on his pallet near the hearth, Rosemary sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. She had spoken more about Daniel and Samuel today than she had in the past year. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but somehow sharing it had made it feel less overwhelming. She glanced at the sleeping cowboy, his face peaceful in repose. There was something about him that inspired trust, despite her natural caution. Or perhaps it was simply that isolation had made her hungry for human connection, even fleeting. In the morning, he would still be a stranger who would ride away once he was healed. And she would return to her solitary existence, as she had always intended. This brief interruption would soon be nothing but a memory. Yet as she finally retired to her bed behind the curtain that divided the cabin, Rosemary found herself wondering what stories Wade Blackburn kept behind his guarded eyes, and why the thought of his eventual departure left her feeling strangely hollow. The next week passed in a rhythm that gradually became familiar. Wade's strength returned steadily, and true to his word, he insisted on earning his keep. He handled the heavier chores that Rosemary had been managing alone, repairing the chicken coop, patching the roof where winter snow had damaged it, even breaking ground for a larger vegetable garden than she'd planned to plant alone. You don't need to do all this, she protested one afternoon as he set fence posts to extend her corral. Your shoulder is barely healed. Wade drove another post into the ground with surprising strength. I've imposed on you long enough, Mrs. Foster. Consider this interest on the debt I owe you. Rosemary, she said suddenly, surprising herself. If you're going to keep working yourself half to death on my behalf, you might as well use my given name. He looked up, a smile warming his features. Rosemary, then. It suits you. Something about the way he said her name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She turned away to hide the heat rising in her cheeks. There's water in the bucket when you're thirsty, she said over her shoulder as she retreated to the cabin. Inside, Rosemary pressed her hands to her face, shocked at her reaction. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as anything but a widow, a woman whose heart was buried alongside her husband and child. Yet here she was, blushing like a girl because a man had said her name with a smile. This is madness, she whispered to herself. He'll be gone soon, and things will return to normal. But as days stretched into another week, Rosemary found herself wondering what normal would feel like without Wade's presence. She had grown accustomed to the sound of his voice, the way he hummed softly as he worked, the warmth of having another person across the table at mealtimes. Conversation flowed more easily between them now, ranging from practical matters to shared memories of places they'd both seen. She learned that Wade had grown up in Virginia, the son of a horse breeder whose business had been destroyed by the war, that he'd drifted west afterward, working cattle drives and breaking horses, never staying in one place for long. That he carried a pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather, the only family heirloom he'd managed to keep through years of wandering. In turn, she found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Ohio, her work as a nurse, her early years with Daniel. She even spoke of Samuel, his bright laugh, the way his tiny hand had curled around her finger, the hopes she'd had for his future. It hurt to speak of them, but there was healing in the sharing too, as if giving voice to their memories kept some part of them alive. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Wade asked the question she'd been dreading. "Why do you stay out here alone, Rosemary?" She tensed, her hands stilling on the shirt she was mending, one of his, worn thin at the elbows. "This is my home. It's isolated. Dangerous for a woman alone." His voice was gentle, without judgment. "You could sell the land, move to town. There'd be people, companionship." "I don't need companionship," she said, more sharply than she'd intended. Then, softening, "This land was Daniel's dream. Our dream. I can't abandon it." Wade was silent for a long moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Dreams can change," he said finally. "They have to, sometimes, or we'd all be trapped in what might have been." Rosemary looked down at the shirt in her hands. "What would you know about it? You're a drifter. You've never put down roots, never lost something you couldn't bear to lose." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. When she glanced up, Wade's face was turned away, his profile rigid with some emotion she couldn't name. "I'm sorry," she said, regretting her harsh words. "That wasn't fair." "No, you're right in a way," he said, his voice low. "I've spent a lot of years running. Not putting down roots means not risking their loss." He turned to face her, his eyes shadowed in the fading light. "But it also means never having anything worth keeping." The honesty in his words touched something deep within her. For the first time, Rosemary allowed herself to truly see Wade Blackburn not as a wounded stranger, not as a temporary disruption to her solitude, but as a man with his own scars and regrets, his own unspoken griefs. "I stay because I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid that if I leave this place, I'll lose the last connections I have to them. Their memories are here in every corner of this cabin, in the trees Daniel planted, in the rocking chair where I nursed Samuel." Her voice caught. "If I leave, what becomes of those memories? What becomes of me?" Wade's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "You carry them with you, Rosemary. They're part of who you are, not tied to this land." She didn't pull away from his touch. "And who am I, if not Daniel Foster's widow? Samuel's mother? I don't know anymore." "You're Rosemary," he said simply. "A woman of remarkable strength and courage. Someone who takes in wounded strangers and nurses them back to health. Someone who has faced unimaginable loss but still finds the will to rise each morning and face the day." Tears burned behind her eyes, and Rosemary blinked rapidly to hold them at bay. No one had spoken to her with such understanding since Daniel's death. No one had seen her as Wade did in that moment. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, their hands still joined on the rough wooden bench between them. Something had shifted between them, some barrier had fallen, and Rosemary was not yet ready to examine what that might mean. Inside the cabin later that night, Wade studied the small shelf of books beside Rosemary's rocking chair. "You're well read," he observed, running a finger along the spines. "Books are good company," she replied, busy at the stove. "Daniel taught me to love reading. He would read aloud in the evenings, everything from Shakespeare to dime novels." Wade selected a volume and opened it carefully. "Wordsworth," he noted with approval. "My mother favored the Romantics. She used to recite Tintin Abbey while she worked in her garden." Rosemary turned in surprise. "You know Wordsworth?" A smile touched his lips. "I may look like a simple cowhand, but my mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She made sure her children knew more than just horses and cattle." "I didn't mean to imply I know you didn't." He replaced the book and selected another. "People are rarely what they seem at first glance." We all contain multitudes, as Mr. Whitman would say. Rosemary found herself smiling. Whitman is on the third shelf. Daniel thought him too modern, but I find his work invigorating. Wade's eyes met hers with shared understanding. Perhaps you'll let me borrow it sometime. You're welcome to read anything here, she said, gesturing to the shelves. Though I suspect you'll be moving on soon. Your shoulder seems almost healed. Something like regret flickered across his face. Yes, I suppose I should be thinking about rejoining the cattle drive, if they haven't given me up for dead already. An unexpected pang of loss shot through Rosemary at his words. She turned back to the stove, stirring the pot with unnecessary vigor. Of course, you have responsibilities. Wade was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. Rosemary, there's something I should tell you about. A sudden pounding at the door cut him off. Rosemary froze, ladle in hand, as 3 more heavy blows shook the cabin's sturdy door. Mrs. Foster, a gruff voice called. We know you're in there. Open up. Wade was immediately alert, moving swiftly to the window to peer through a gap in the curtains. His hand went instinctively to his hip, where his gun would have been. 3 men on horseback, he reported in a low voice. Armed. Do you know them? Rosemary shook her head. Reaching for the rifle, she kept near the door. No, I don't get many visitors out here, especially after dark. Mrs. Foster, the voice came again. We're looking for a man. Tall fellow, dark hair. Might be wounded. Riding a bay horse with a white blaze. You seen him? Wade's face hardened. He motioned for Rosemary to stay back, then gestured toward the rear of the cabin, where a small window might provide escape. Rosemary ignored him, stepping forward with the rifle in her hands. Who's asking? She called through the door. Name's Fletcher. We represent the Cattlemen's Association. This man is wanted for cattle rustling and murder. Killed one of our men 3 weeks back. Rosemary turned to Wade, shock and betrayal washing over her face. Is it true? She whispered. Wade's eyes held her steadily. No, he said with quiet intensity. That's not what happened. I can explain, but not with them out there. They're not who they claim to be. Open up, Mrs. Foster. Fletcher shouted. Don't make this difficult. All we want is the rustler. You'll be left in peace. Rosemary's mind raced. Everything in her wanted to trust Wade, the man who had worked alongside her, who had spoken of poetry and shared her grief, whose touch had awakened feelings she'd thought long dead. But what did she really know of him? If you're innocent, she said, keeping her voice low, why are they hunting you? Wade moved closer, his expression urgent but calm. Because they're the rustlers, not me. I was hired by a rancher named Harrington to track them down after they hit his herd. I got too close. They ambushed me and my partner. Killed him, wounded me. I've been tracking them since, gathering evidence. Evidence? He nodded toward his saddlebags, still in the corner where Rosemary had placed them weeks ago. In my journal. Names, dates, descriptions. Enough to hang them if I can get it to the territorial marshal in Billings. We're coming in, Mrs. Foster. Fletcher shouted. The sound of boots on the porch steps followed his words. Rosemary made her decision in an instant. My root cellar, she whispered, pointing to the trapdoor partially hidden beneath a rag rug. Go. Now. Wade hesitated. I won't leave you to face them alone. They don't want me, she insisted, pushing him toward the trapdoor. I can handle this. Go. With clear reluctance, Wade grabbed his saddlebags and slipped through the trapdoor into the small storage space beneath the cabin. Rosemary quickly replaced the rug, then moved to the door, rifle ready but not overtly threatening. She opened the door to find 3 men on her porch, their hands hovering near their holstered guns. The leader, a tall man with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes, stepped forward. Evening, Mrs. Foster. Sorry to disturb you so late. Mr. Fletcher, she acknowledged with a nod. What's this about a rustler? Fletcher's eyes scanned the cabin behind her. Dangerous man. Shot one of my hands in cold blood when we caught him stealing cattle. Been tracking him for weeks. His trail led this way. Rosemary kept her expression neutral. I haven't seen anyone matching that description. I don't get many travelers out this way. One of the other men, younger and more nervous looking, pointed toward the stable. That's his horse, Fletcher. The bay with the blaze. I'd recognize it anywhere. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. Care to explain that, Mrs. Foster? Rosemary didn't flinch. Found it wandering 2 weeks ago. No writer. Thought someone might come looking for it eventually. And you didn't think to report it to anyone? Fletcher's tone was skeptical. Report to whom? I get to town maybe once a month. The horse was half-starved. I fed it, that's all. Fletcher exchanged glances with his companions. Mind if we have a look around? Just to be sure our man isn't hiding somewhere nearby. Rosemary tightened her grip on the rifle. I do mind, actually. It's late, and I'm alone here. If you want to search my property, come back in daylight with the sheriff. Now listen here, woman, the youngest man started, taking a step forward. Fletcher held up a hand to stop him. No need for unpleasantness. We'll respect your wishes, Mrs. Foster. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But we'll be keeping watch on this area. If you see anything suspicious, you send word to the Broken Spur Ranch. You hear? There's a reward for information leading to this man's capture. I'll keep that in mind, Rosemary said evenly. After a tense moment, Fletcher touched the brim of his hat. Evening then. Sorry to have troubled you. As he turned to leave, he added, Lock your door, Mrs. Foster. Man like that, wounded and desperate. No telling what he might do if he comes this way. Rosemary waited until the men had mounted their horses and ridden out of sight before closing and barring the door. Her hands shook as she set down the rifle and moved to uncover the trapdoor. Wade emerged from the root cellar, his face grim. You're a convincing liar, Rosemary Foster. I'm not sure I was lying, she replied, studying his face. I don't know what's true anymore. You told me you were with a cattle drive, not hunting rustlers for a rancher. Wade sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was going to tell you tonight. I should have told you sooner, but... He trailed off, then met her eyes directly. I was enjoying being just a man in your eyes, not a hired gun with enemies. So you are a gunslinger, she said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. I've been many things, he admitted. Soldier, cowhand, lawman for a time in Colorado. These past few years, I've worked for ranchers having trouble with rustlers or land grabbers. Not proud of all of it, but I've tried to stay on the right side of the law. Rosemary moved to the window, peering out to ensure Fletcher and his men were truly gone. And these men, they're the rustlers you were tracking. Wade nodded. Fletcher and his crew have been hitting isolated ranches across 3 territories. They're organized, careful, kill any witnesses. The rancher who hired me, Harrington, lost his son trying to stop them. He pulled the leather journal from his saddlebags. I've been building a case against them for months. Names, descriptions, patterns of their raids. Enough to convince a judge, if I can get it to one. Rosemary took the journal, flipping through pages of neat handwriting detailing dates, locations, and descriptions of men and stolen cattle. It was methodical, thorough, the work of a man with purpose, not a drifter. This is why they want you dead, she realized. Not because you're a rustler, but because you can prove they are. Yes. Wade's face was somber. My partner and I got careless. They caught us watching them move a stolen herd. Jim took a bullet to the heart. I barely got away. His hand went to his shoulder. Been running ever since, trying to stay ahead of them until I could reach the marshal in Billings. Rosemary closed the journal, her mind racing. They'll be back, she said finally. They don't believe me. They've probably been watching the cabin for days, waiting for you to show yourself. I know. Wade's expression was troubled. Which means I need to leave tonight. I've put you in enough danger already. Tonight? In the dark, with them watching? That's madness. I can't stay, Rosemary. They'll come back at dawn with more men, maybe torches. I won't have your home destroyed because of me. Rosemary paced the small cabin, thinking furiously. There's another way, she said suddenly. We can go together. I know these hills better than they do. There's a trail through the high country that leads to Billings. It's rough going, but they won't expect us to take it. Wade shook his head. Us? No. This is my fight, not yours. It became my fight when Fletcher stood on my porch and threatened me, she retorted. Besides, you're still healing. You won't make it alone. And what about your home? Everything you've built here? Rosemary glanced around the cabin, the home she had shared with Daniel, where Samuel had taken his first steps, where she had grieved and survived and found a kind of peace. It was just a place, she realized. The memories would go with her, as Wade had said. It's just wood and nails, she said quietly. I can rebuild somewhere else if I need to. Wade studied her face, his expression softening. You'd do this? Leave everything behind to help a man you barely know. Something stirred in Rosemary's heart, something she had thought long dead. I know enough, she said simply. They worked quickly and quietly, packing only what they could carry on horseback. Food, water, weapons, warm clothing. Wade insisted Rosemary take the few valuables and mementos that couldn't be replaced: Daniel's pocket watch, Samuel's tiny shoes, the family Bible with its record of births and deaths. As she tucked the Bible into her saddlebag, Wade touched her arm gently. Are you sure about this, Rosemary? It's not too late to change your mind. She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. I've been hiding from life for 2 years, Wade. Maybe it's time I stopped. They left just after midnight, leading their horses quietly until they were well away from the cabin. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the trail as they made their way higher into the foothills, following a game path that Rosemary knew would eventually connect with an old trapper's route to Billings. We should reach town by tomorrow evening if we push hard, she said as they paused to rest the horses. There's a marshal's office there and a telegraph. We can send word to this Harrington about Fletcher's whereabouts. Wade nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness behind them. Fletcher won't give up easily. He has too much to lose if that journal reaches the law. Then we'll just have to make sure it does, Rosemary replied with more confidence than she felt. They rode through the night and into the dawn, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. As the sun climbed higher, they found themselves in rugged country, following narrow trails that wound between rocky outcroppings and stands of pine. Rosemary led the way, drawing on memories of hunting expeditions with Daniel years earlier. By midday, they reached a high ridge that overlooked the valley they had left behind. In the distance, Rosemary could just make out the tiny square of her cabin, peaceful in the spring sunlight. A plume of dark smoke rose from the chimney. They're there, Wade said grimly, following her gaze. Searching the place. Rosemary felt a momentary pang for her abandoned home, but pushed it aside. Then we keep moving. They'll figure out which way we've gone soon enough. They pressed on, the trail growing steeper and more difficult. Wade's shoulder clearly pained him, though he made no complaint. By late afternoon, Rosemary could tell he was struggling to stay in the saddle. We need to rest, she insisted when they reached a small clearing beside a stream. Just for an hour. The horses need water, and you need to save your strength. Wade didn't argue, which told her how exhausted he truly was. They dismounted, allowing the horses to drink while Rosemary checked Wade's wound. The exertion had caused it to seep blood, staining his shirt. You've torn something, she said, cleaning the wound as best she could. It needs proper tending, but this will have to do for now. Wade winced as she applied pressure. I've had worse. That doesn't make me feel better, she retorted, but there was no heat in her words. She finished bandaging him with strips torn from her petticoat, then sat back on her heels. Rest. I'll keep watch. He caught her hand as she started to rise. Rosemary, he said softly. Thank you. For everything. I don't deserve the risk you're taking. The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. We can debate what you deserve when we're safely in Billings, she said, trying to lighten the moment. His thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand. When this is over, he said carefully, what will you do? Will you go back to your cabin? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Rosemary had been avoiding thinking beyond their immediate goal of reaching Billings alive. Her future was a nebulous thing that she hadn't dared examine too closely. I don't know, she admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Wade held her gaze steadily. If we make it through this, I'd like the chance to the crack of a rifle shot cut him off. Dirt kicked up inches from where they sat. Down, Wade shouted, pulling Rosemary to the ground as a second shot splintered the tree behind them. He drew his revolver in one fluid motion, scanning the ridgeline above them. There, he muttered. 2 riders, moving fast. They must have followed our trail. Rosemary's heart hammered in her chest. The horses, I'll get them. Stay low. Wade crouched, using the stream bank as cover as he moved toward where their mounts were tethered. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Rosemary pulled her rifle from its scabbard, taking aim at the approaching riders. She fired once, not expecting to hit at that distance, but hoping to slow their advance. Wade returned with the horses, his face taut with pain and determination. Mount up, he urged. We need to make the trees. They rode hard, abandoning the trail for the denser forest that covered the mountainside. Behind them, shouts and the sound of pursuit drove them deeper into unfamiliar territory. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, making it difficult to see the ground ahead. "There's a ravine up ahead," Rosemary called over her shoulder. "If we can cross it, there's a chance they'll lose our trail." Wade nodded grimly. They pushed forward, the horses struggling on the steep, uneven ground. The ravine appeared suddenly before them, a narrow gash in the earth, steep-sided but not impassable. Without hesitation, Rosemary guided her mare down the slippery slope, praying the horse's sure-footedness would see them through. Wade followed, his bay snorting in protest but obeying nonetheless. At the bottom, a shallow stream wound its way through a tangle of underbrush. Rosemary urged her horse into the water, riding downstream to mask their trail. Wade followed suit, both of them hunched low over their horses' necks to avoid overhanging branches. They rode in the stream bed for nearly a mile before climbing out on the far bank. The forest was quiet now, no sounds of pursuit reaching them. Twilight was falling rapidly, making further travel dangerous in the unfamiliar terrain. "We need to find shelter for the night," Rosemary said, keeping her voice low. "They won't be able to track us in the dark." Wade nodded, his face pale in the fading light. "I know this area, or close enough. There's an old line shack about 2 miles northeast of here. Trappers use it sometimes. It might offer some protection for the night." They rode cautiously, alert for any sign of Fletcher and his men. The line shack, when they finally found it in near darkness, was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small stone fireplace and a single window. It smelled of damp and disuse, but it was shelter. Rosemary insisted on no fire, despite the chill of the spring night. Instead, they wrapped themselves in the blankets they'd brought and shared the cold provisions from their saddlebags. Outside, they had hobbled the horses in a small clearing behind the shack, where they could graze but wouldn't wander far. "We should reach Billings by noon tomorrow if we start at first light," Wade said, checking his revolver by feel in the darkness. Rosemary nodded, though she knew he couldn't see the gesture. "And Fletcher? He'll be searching, but he's at a disadvantage in unfamiliar country." Wade shifted, and she heard his sharp intake of breath as the movement jarred his wounded shoulder. "Let me check your bandage," she insisted, moving closer in the darkness. Her hands found his arm, then his shoulder, feeling the warmth of fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. "It's bleeding again," she said, concern sharpening her voice. "You've pushed yourself too hard." "No choice," he replied simply. He caught her hand as it rested against his chest. "Rosemary," he said softly, "if something happens to me tomorrow, don't," she interrupted. "Nothing's going to happen." His fingers tightened around hers. "Listen, if something happens, take the journal and ride for Billings. Ask for Marshal Donovan. He knows me, knows about Fletcher. He'll believe you. We'll both make it to Billings," she insisted. "I didn't leave my home behind to lose you now." The words hung between them in the darkness, more revealing than she had intended. Wade's hand moved from hers to gently touch her face, fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "Rosemary Foster," he murmured, "you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Before she could respond, his lips found hers in the darkness, tentative at first, then more certain as she leaned into the kiss. It had been so long since she'd been held, since she'd felt the warmth of another person's touch. Something inside her that had been frozen for 2 long years began to thaw, flooding her with emotions she had thought were buried with Daniel. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I thought my heart died with them," she whispered. "I never expected to feel anything like this again." "I know," he said softly, his breath warm against her face. "I've been running so long, I forgot what it felt like to want to stay somewhere. With someone." They held each other through the long night, finding comfort and warmth in the simple human connection. Words came easier in the darkness, confessions, hopes, fears. Wade spoke of his years of wandering, of the emptiness that had driven him from place to place. Rosemary shared the depth of her grief, the guilt she felt at surviving when Daniel and Samuel had not. "Daniel would want you to live," Wade said gently as she spoke of her husband. "To find happiness again." "I know," she admitted. "In my head, I know that. But my heart, it feels like betrayal sometimes." Wade's hand stroked her hair. Love isn't a finite thing, Rosemary. Loving again doesn't diminish what you had with him. She was silent for a long moment, letting his words sink in. When did you become so wise? She asked finally, a smile in her voice. I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks, he replied. Lying in your cabin, watching you, listening to you. Seeing how you've carried your grief but refused to let it break you. You've taught me more about courage than all my years of fighting ever did. Dawn found them still talking, making plans for what would happen once they reached Billings. Wade would present his evidence to Marshal Donovan. Rosemary would send a telegram to a cousin in Missouri, asking if she could visit while she decided what to do next. And after? Wade asked as they prepared to leave the line shack. After Fletcher is dealt with, and you've visited your cousin? Rosemary hesitated, then met his gaze steadily in the early morning light. I don't know, she said honestly. But I think I'd like to find out if there's a place for me somewhere. Maybe not alone this time. Wade's smile was like sunrise after a long night. I'd like that too, he said simply. They set out as the first light gilded the eastern horizon, riding cautiously but with renewed purpose. The trail to Billings was clearer now, a well-traveled route that wound through gentler country. By mid-morning, they could see the town in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled in the valley below. We made it, Rosemary said with relief. Wade nodded, but his expression remained vigilant. Don't celebrate yet. We still need to reach the marshal's office without Fletcher finding us. They approached Billings from the north, avoiding the main road into town. The streets were busy with morning activity wagons delivering goods, townspeople going about their business, children running to and from the schoolhouse. Rosemary felt exposed after days in the wilderness, acutely aware of curious glances cast their way. The marshal's office was a solid brick building on the main street, the territorial flag hanging limply from a pole out front. They dismounted a block away, approaching on foot to attract less attention. Marshal Donovan should be inside, Wade said, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. Once we're there, we'll be safe. They were halfway across the street when Rosemary spotted them, Fletcher and two of his men, emerging from the saloon 100 yards away. She clutched Wade's arm in warning. Fletcher, she whispered urgently. By the saloon. Wade cursed under his breath as Fletcher's head turned in their direction. Recognition and fury crossed the rustler's face almost simultaneously. He shouted something to his companions, his hand going to his gun. Run, Wade ordered, pushing Rosemary toward the marshal's office. Go! Shots rang out, sending pedestrians scattering in panic. Rosemary ran, heart pounding, aware of Wade close behind her, returning fire to cover their retreat. They reached the marshal's office just as Fletcher and his men closed the distance. Marshal, Wade shouted as they burst through the door. Donovan, a burly man with a silver mustache, rose from behind a desk, hand immediately going to his sidearm. What in blazes, Fletcher's gang? Wade interrupted. Outside, they're armed and shooting. Recognition dawned on the marshal's weathered face. Blackburn, by God, we thought you were dead. More shots shattered the window, sending glass spraying across the office floor. Donovan ducked, then moved swiftly to the gun rack on the wall, tossing a shotgun to a young deputy who had emerged from a back room. Get down, he ordered Rosemary, who had taken cover behind a heavy oak desk. To Wade, he added, you picked a hell of a time to return from the dead, Blackburn. Brought you a gift, Wade replied grimly, pulling the journal from inside his coat and tossing it to the marshal. Everything you need to hang Fletcher and his whole crew. Donovan caught the book one-handed, flipping it open briefly before tucking it into his vest pocket. First we have to survive long enough to arrest them, he growled. Outside, Fletcher's voice carried clearly through the shattered window. Blackburn, send out the woman and the journal, and the rest of you can walk away. Go to hell, Fletcher, Donovan shouted back. He turned to the deputy. Jenkins, get out the back way. Bring every able-bodied man you can find. Now, the young deputy nodded and disappeared through the rear door. Donovan moved to position himself near the front window, shotgun ready. How many with him, he asked Wade. At least 2 that we saw. Probably more nearby. Rosemary peered cautiously around the desk. They followed us from my homestead near Chisholm Ranch. They've been tracking us for 2 days. Donovan gave her an appraising look. And you are? Rosemary Foster, Wade answered for her. She saved my life and risked everything to help me get that journal to you. She deserves a medal, not a bullet from Fletcher's gang. A small smile touched Donovan's face. Always did have a way with the ladies, Blackburn. To Rosemary, he added more seriously, "Thank you, Mrs. Foster. Your courage has done this territory a great service." Another volley of shots peppered the front of the building. Donovan returned fire with the shotgun, forcing Fletcher and his men to seek cover behind a water trough across the street. "We can't wait for Jenkins," Wade said, checking his ammunition. "They'll try to circle around back soon." As if confirming his words, the sound of footsteps on the wooden boardwalk beside the building reached them. Donovan nodded to Wade, who moved silently to position himself beside the side window. The next few minutes passed in a blur of gunfire and shouted orders. Rosemary found herself pressed against the wall, Daniel's old revolver in her hand, as men tried to force their way into the marshal's office. She fired once when a bearded face appeared at the broken window, her shot going wide but driving the man back. Wade moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence, his every shot deliberate and controlled despite his injured shoulder. Beside him, Marshal Donovan was a force of nature, his booming voice and deadly aim keeping Fletcher's men at bay. The standoff might have lasted hours, but the arrival of Jenkins with a dozen armed townsmen turned the tide. Caught between the marshal's office and the newly arrived reinforcements, Fletcher and his remaining men found themselves surrounded. "It's over, Fletcher," Donovan shouted from the doorway, shotgun leveled at the rustler's chest. "Drop your weapons or die where you stand." For a tense moment, it seemed Fletcher might choose death over surrender. His cold eyes found Wade's, hatred burning in their depths. Then, with a curse, he let his gun fall to the dirt. One by one, his men followed suit. The townsmen moved in, securing weapons and binding the prisoner's hands. Marshal Donovan stepped forward to personally shackle Fletcher, a grim satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "Jacob Fletcher, you're under arrest for cattle rustling, murder, and attempting to kill a federal agent," he pronounced formally. "You'll hang for what you've done." Fletcher spat in the dirt. "This ain't over, Blackburn," he snarled as he was led away. Not by a long shot. Wade watched him go, his expression unreadable. Only when the last of Fletcher's gang had been marched toward the jail did he turn to Rosemary, who stood in the doorway of the marshal's office, Daniel's revolver still clutched in her hand. "It's over," he said gently, taking the gun and uncocking it. "They can't hurt us now." The adrenaline that had sustained her drained away suddenly, leaving Rosemary light-headed and trembling. Wade caught her as her knees buckled, supporting her weight as he guided her back inside to a chair. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe. It's done." Marshal Donovan returned, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. He poured generous measures, handing them around without comment. "Fletcher's men are locked up tight," he reported, settling behind his desk with a weary sigh. "Judge Williams arrives next week for circuit court. With that journal of yours, Blackburn, we've got enough to see them all hanged." He raised his glass. "To justice served." Wade touched his glass to the marshal's, then to Rosemary's. "To new beginnings," he added softly, his eyes holding hers. They spent the next several hours giving their statements, recounting the events that had led them to Billings. Rosemary described finding Wade wounded on her doorstep, nursing him back to health, and their flight through the mountains when Fletcher's men caught up to them. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Foster," Donovan said when she finished. "Not many would have taken in a stranger, let alone risked their life to help him." Rosemary glanced at Wade, who was talking with Jenkins in the corner of the office. "He's worth it," she said simply. By evening, the excitement in town had settled to a dull roar. News of the shootout and capture of the notorious Fletcher gang spread like wildfire, drawing curious onlookers to the jail and ensuring the saloon did a brisk business as townsmen gathered to share increasingly embellished versions of the day's events. Donovan insisted on putting Wade and Rosemary up at the hotel, arranging adjoining rooms, and posting a deputy in the hallway as a precaution. "Fletcher has friends," he explained. "Best to be careful until the trial." In her room, Rosemary sank gratefully into a hot bath, washing away days of dust and fear. She had sent her telegram to her cousin in Missouri, and received a prompt reply welcoming her for as long as she wished to stay. A stage would leave for Cheyenne in 2 days, where she could catch the train east. But as she dressed in clean clothes provided by the marshal's wife, Rosemary found herself uncertain about the journey. The events of the past weeks had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The grief that had defined her existence for 2 years had not vanished, but it had shifted, making room for new feelings, new possibilities. A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. "Rosemary," Wade's voice. "May I come in?" She crossed to the door and opened it. Wade stood there, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, his wounded arm in a proper sling provided by the town doctor. His eyes warmed as they took her in. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Rosemary felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look better yourself, now that you're not covered in trail dust." He smiled, then grew serious. "Donovan tells me you've made arrangements to travel to Missouri." "Yes. My cousin Elizabeth has invited me to stay with her family in Jefferson City." She hesitated. "I thought it would give me time to think about what comes next." Wade nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "It's a good plan. Safe." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Rosemary found herself studying his face, memorizing the lines and angles as if preparing for a long absence. "Will you go back to ranching?" she asked finally. "After the trial?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so many years chasing men like Fletcher, I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else." He paused, then added quietly, "But I'm tired of the chase. Tired of never having a home, never belonging anywhere." Rosemary's heart quickened. "What would you do instead?" Wade took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. "That depends," he said, his voice low, "on whether I'd be doing it alone." Understanding dawned in Rosemary's eyes. "Wade, I know it's too soon," he interrupted gently. "I know you need time. But I wanted you to know, before you leave for Missouri, that he faltered, then continued with quiet determination, "that I've fallen in love with you, Rosemary Foster. And if you decide, after you've had time to think, that there might be a place for me in your life, I'll be waiting." Tears filled Rosemary's eyes, not of grief this time, but of something sweeter and more complex. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "I don't know if I'll ever be the woman I was before." Wade's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear. "I don't want who you were before," he said. "I want who you are now, strong, brave, compassionate. The woman who saved a stranger's life and then risked her own to see justice done." Rosemary leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid to lose again." "I know," he murmured. "So am I. But I'm more afraid of never finding out what we could be to each other." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. "Come with me," she said suddenly. "To Missouri. Not as a commitment, but as a beginning. A chance to know each other away from danger and fear." Hope blazed in Wade's eyes. "You're sure?" In answer, Rosemary rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that held promise and possibility. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I'm sure that I want to try," she said. "The rest, we'll figure out together." 2 months later, on a warm summer evening, Rosemary stood on the porch of her cousin Elizabeth's home in Jefferson City, watching the sunset paint the Missouri sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind her, the sounds of family life spilled through the open windows, children's laughter, the clatter of dishes being cleared after supper, Elizabeth's husband playing the piano while their youngest daughter sang along in a sweet, clear voice. Footsteps on the porch announced Wade's presence before his hand came to rest lightly at the small of her back. She leaned into him automatically, a gesture of trust and affection that had become natural over the weeks they had spent here. "Beautiful evening," he observed, his gaze on her face rather than the sunset. Rosemary smiled. "It is. Elizabeth says the weather will hold fair for our journey." The trial of Fletcher and his gang had concluded 2 weeks earlier, with all the men receiving sentences of hanging or long imprisonment. With that chapter closed, Rosemary and Wade had been discussing their next steps. The letter that had arrived that morning had decided matters. "I received a reply from Mr. Harrington today," Wade said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. He's still offering that land near Cheyenne as a reward for bringing Fletcher to justice. Says it's good grazing country, with a creek running through it and timber for building. Even has a small cabin we could improve upon. It sounds perfect, Rosemary said softly. The decision to start over, to build a new life together, had come gradually over their time in Missouri. Healing and grief worked on their own timelines, she had discovered, but love had its own power too, the power to create space for joy alongside sorrow, for new memories alongside treasured ones. Wade took her hand, turning it palm up to place a small object in it. I had this made in town yesterday, he explained as Rosemary examined the simple gold band nestled in her palm. I know it's not fancy, but it's beautiful, she interrupted, tears springing to her eyes. Wade took the ring back, holding it between his fingers as he faced her. Rosemary Foster, these past months have shown me what it means to truly love someone, to want their happiness above all else, to see them as they are and cherish every part. If you'll have me, I want to spend my life showing you that love every day. Rosemary's heart felt too full for words. She had carried her grief like a shield for so long, protecting herself from further pain by refusing to risk further love. But Wade had shown her that the heart could expand, that new love didn't replace or diminish what came before but added to it, creating something richer and more complex. I will, she whispered, holding out her left hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added, on one condition. Wade raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of amusement and curiosity. Name it. That we plant trees on our new land, she said. Apple trees, like Daniel and I always talked about. And that we name our first son Samuel to honor his memory. Understanding and love filled Wade's eyes. I think that's a fine idea, he said softly. Our children should know about the brave man and the little boy who came before. They're part of who you are, which means they'll be part of our family too. Rosemary reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this man who had stumbled wounded into her life had found his way into her heart as well. I love you, Wade Blackburn, she said simply. More than I ever thought possible again. His answer was a kiss that held the promise of all the years to come, years of building, growing, loving. Years of a life neither of them had dared to imagine before fate brought a wounded cowboy to a widow's door and began the healing of two broken hearts. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn day, Rosemary Blackburn stood in the doorway of her home, watching her husband lead their 2-year-old son among the young apple trees that lined the path to their ranch house. Little Samuel's laughter rang out as Wade swung him up onto his shoulders, pointing out a hawk circling high above their property. The Blackburn Ranch had flourished under their care. What had started as a simple claim with a one-room cabin had grown into a prosperous cattle operation with a comfortable home, sturdy outbuildings, and a reputation for fair dealing throughout the territory. Wade's knowledge of cattle and Rosemary's skill with horses had combined to create something neither could have built alone. Mama, Samuel called, waving frantically from his perch on his father's shoulders. Come see. Rosemary smiled, one hand resting lightly on her swelling belly where their second child grew. Coming, sweetheart, she called back, stepping off the porch into the golden afternoon light. As she walked toward her family, Rosemary felt the familiar weight of her locket against her chest. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, Daniel on one side, baby Samuel on the other. She no longer needed to open it to remember their faces. They lived in her heart, part of the tapestry of love and loss that had shaped her into the woman she was now. But alongside those memories were newer ones: Wade's face when she had placed newborn Samuel in his arms, the quiet evenings by the fire reading poetry aloud, the 1,000 small moments of tenderness and passion that had rebuilt her faith in life and love. What do you think, Rosie? Wade asked as she reached them, his free arms circling her waist. Will we get apples next year? She looked at the sturdy young trees, their leaves beginning to turn with the season. I think so, she said, leaning into his embrace. They've taken root well. Like us, she thought but didn't need to say aloud. Like the love that had grown between a wounded cowboy and a grieving widow, flourishing against all odds in the harsh but beautiful landscape of the West. Samuel squirmed to be let down, and Wade complied, watching fondly as the boy ran to examine a fallen leaf with the intense concentration only a child could muster. Happy, Wade asked quietly, his eyes on Rosemary's face. She turned to him, this man who had stumbled bloodied onto her porch and into her life, bringing healing and hope when she had thought both beyond her reach. The answer was in her smile, in the life they had built together, in the family that continued to grow. More than I ever dreamed possible, she said, and sealed the truth of it with a kiss.